Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. I am very excited about our guest today. She is an author, writer, and reporter who mostly writes about music, identity, and culture. She has been published in the New York Times, The Guardian, Rolling Stone magazine, just to name a few, and her debut novel, In Our Shoes, which is a collection of essays that analyze the ludicrous standards Black millennial women are expected to live up to, was picked up by Penguin Random House's Plume in auction and will be released in March 2023. I could go on about her amazing accomplishments, but let me first introduce my guest, Brianna Holt, to the show. Brianna, welcome to The Conscious Artist.
Hi, thank you. I am very excited to be speaking with you today.
I'm so happy you're here with us today. I really love speaking to writers and authors because I think your creative process is very similar to that of ours as musicians. And I'd love for you to share a little bit of your background with us and sort of how you came into the field of journalism.
Yeah, for sure. So I had a very interesting approach to journalism. While I did go to journalism school, in my family, my parents always wanted me to pursue something a bit more secure. So I started off actually in nursing school. And then by the second semester, I took a class called organic chemistry. And I was like, I never want to study this hard for a class again. I need to do something that I actually enjoy. And that had always been writing in some type of medium. When I was in high school, I worked on the yearbook and the high school newspaper. When I was younger, I would write fictional short stories that I still have to this day. And also, my dad is an author. So I felt like just writing was very embedded within my family. And so I switched my major to journalism, still double majored in journalism and communication, just to kind of get my parents' blessing and let them know that I had something, another degree to fall back on in case it didn't work out. And when I graduated, I was lucky to land a fellowship at BuzzFeed, which at the time was, and still is, but was a huge publication and platform for entertainment and lifestyle news. And so I worked there in the fellowship as a entertainment reporter and then moved on to an entertainment editor. And shortly after, I had a slump where we had a huge layoff happen at the company. About 20% of the company was let go. And that was really the time when I had to really think about, how do you want to re-enter this industry? What type of writing do you want to do? Was the entertainment writing something you want to be known for? Is that enough for you? Do you feel like you're creating change with that? And I didn't. And what I felt I wanted to really cover was identity and race, because within the conversations that I was having daily with my friends and my family and talking about on Twitter and just reading about and really getting into on social media was really about race and identity. And that's when I made that shift to go into freelance and start heavily reporting on race and identity and how it aligns, especially with music, because I would say I'm a music head. So yeah, and one thing just led to the other, and here we are today.
Wow, I love that. And I really love how much you focus on race and identity in your works because, on paper, for example, in my bio or like in an interview, I always say I'm an Indian American concert pianist. And, I think my name gives away my cultural identity clearly, but if you hear me speaking, you probably wouldn't assume that I have Indian roots. And my roots are extremely important to me and a huge part of my identity. And so I'm really curious to know what it's like for you, being a woman of color in the literary world. How do you describe yourself on and off paper?
I always immediately describe myself as a Black woman. Before I am a woman, before I am a woman of color, I am a Black woman. And I feel like that's very important for people to know and recognize and be receptive to, because my identity bleeds throughout everything that I put out. Even if I am writing an article that relates to music, typically I find some way to do a culture analysis into it, especially if the artist is Black, and talk about their path and how their path may have been different than the path of other artists, or what their lyrical content, how it relates to the Black diaspora and the United States and things as such.
I think the topic of color makes some people uncomfortable because, look, it can bring up feelings of shame, guilt, anger, repression, frustration, injustice. And I think it's exactly for that reason that we need to have conversations about it. In today's political climate, it's more important than ever to share personal experiences, to help spread more awareness. And, on one hand, I feel like it's not my place to sit and lecture people about what they do and don't know, because who am I to say anything? And on the other hand,
Mm-hmm.
it is my duty and my privilege, because I have a small platform and I am a woman of color in a historically predominantly white male world,
Mm-hmm.
and like that's a simple fact. And I think we need to be clear about what are facts versus what are opinions. And I think that maybe, I don't know, I feel that conversations often around these difficult topics become so politicized and heated right away because we speak from our emotions and we try to convince others to think and believe and act as we would. But that's not how human beings work. We are all individuals. We have hundreds and thousands of internal and external factors that shape our views and our beliefs and our understanding of the world. And even I, as a woman of color, being Indian, will never fully be able to understand the difficulties that you, a woman of color, being Black, have faced in your life. But, we can
Mm-hmm.
talk about it and we can exchange ideas and we can have an open mind, first and foremost, beginning with the understanding that there is no one universal truth and that each individual person's reality is both possibly fact for them and subjective for the world.
Yeah, it's definitely important to talk about. I agree. I think that's the only way. I don't think change happens without conversations. And so being avoidant or non receptive to these conversations typically, that only, in my opinion, takes us steps backwards. And that's why during the summer of 2020, I primarily focused on uncovering race and culture and identity because it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, not for me, but that it seemed people were very receptive to something that Black writers had been putting out for years, for decades, for centuries. All of a sudden, we had this one summer where nothing else was going on. You couldn't be distracted by a vacation or going to a festival because nothing was going on. We were just at home and we were just online looking for things to do. And if people didn't want to focus on the COVID aspect of news, and the only other thing that was really going on was Black Lives Matter that people were really heavily talking about. And I saw that as an opportunity to really be able to have these conversations, like you're saying right now, factual and a very much sometimes emotional base, but be able to have those conversations with a mass of people because people were more receptive to it during that time.
Yeah. And I wonder if perhaps because you're saying that these are conversations, these are topics that, of course, your community has been talking about for a long time. But I wonder if people also became more open and more receptive to hearing about it because at the forefront of 2020 was a global pandemic, global crisis, and global mental health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
people, I feel like we don't talk enough about how racism and discrimination and exclusivity in the negative sense can be really detrimental to an individual's mental health, and also how it affects an entire culture's mental health, which is often masked by their quote unquote mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, for
Yeah.
example, in Indian culture, it's so common to grow up with shame and guilt and self sacrifice because we're constantly focused on what others think of us and what others will say. And I know that's not unique to Indian culture. So,
Yeah.
that also makes me wonder if it's like a symptom of being treated as less than by others. In the case of Indians, like by colonizers and conquerors, like I wonder if it's ingrained this mentality of having to earn our place in society, even within our own peer group, or else be shunned.
Yeah, I feel like similar in Black culture, especially Black women more specifically, we grow up with a lot of confidence issues. And it's not so much from our family. I feel like actually confidence is a very it's one of the characteristics that we describe when we talk about the phrase black girl magic, to exude this
Mm.
confidence and this joy and these different characteristics. But once you go to school and you're surrounded by non-black people, mostly speaking to white people, who make you feel bad about your skin tone, your facial features, your hair. It's almost as if every aspect of your physical identity is torn apart. And I know colorism is also, it goes across cultures. There's colorism within the Indian community as well. And all of that stems from, like you said, colonizers, Western European beauty standards infiltrating just all of these different communities. And it really, a lot of Black women go through this period in their life, typically, and I write about this in my book, typically in their mid to late 20s, when they really start finally coming into themselves. They feel unapologetic for their Blackness. At one point, it was masking their Blackness in order to just succeed, in order to get the job, in order to get into the school, in order to be liked by their peers, and then getting to a point where all of that performance, all of that code switching, all of this downplaying yourself, watering yourself down, it no longer is fulfilling, and it's just more fulfilling to just be yourself and love yourself. I think also what we're kind of seeing happening when it comes to Black women and these confidence issues that maybe we had at once, we're seeing a lot of non-Black women, against mostly white women, mimic these traits, these physical attributes of ours that we were, as a child, made fun of. We're told, being dark skinned is ugly, or you're so dark, but we see lighter people spending tons of money to tan, to go to tanning salons, have tanning memberships.
I say that all
You
the
know,
time. It's so funny.
yeah, it's crazy. It's full circle. Or like, oh, your lips are so big, your lips are huge. Okay, interesting. I would say and don't quote me on this, I would have to check, but I'm pretty sure that the largest demographic of who gets lip fillers and is paying for lip fillers is probably white women. Even seeing our hairstyles, that were once called ghetto, braids are ghetto, and weave, colorful weave, and all this stuff is ghetto. We're seeing Kylie Jenner and and Dua Lipa and a lot of white musicians, celebrities, female celebrities take on these hairstyles. So I think in a way that also helps with the confidence, because it's like, oh, okay, I've already been doing this.
It's so funny you say all of this because I have felt a cultural conflict inside and out my whole life because I was a brown kid in Chicago in the 90s. And I did my best
Mm-hmm,
to ignore my Indian roots and fit in with the white kids. And I can say with certainty that the majority of my brown friends my age felt and did the same growing up in the US. And
mm-hmm,
today, like I am so proud to be Indian, to be a woman of color, and I'm extremely proud to be one of few female Indians in Western classical music. That's
mm-hmm.
also something very special for me. And now, look, I would have to fact check the following statement, but I'm 99% sure that I am the first or one of the first for sure, fully Indian and definitely Indian females to attend Curtis, Reina Sofia, Hans Eisler, to win a major prize at the Geneva International Competition, and one of the first, if not the first, Indian female Western classical musician to have a mental health podcast. And part of
Yeah.
part of me feels like,
Wow.
why? I mean, it sounds really cool, but part of me feels like, why should I have to sit and specify that I'm the first Indian or first Indian female? And on the other hand, this is huge. And it's important to
Mm-mm.
specify those things because some young Indian girl out there might hear this or might read about it somewhere and realize that she doesn't have to limit herself because representation does matter.
Definitely. You see the same thing within the journalism and writing industry. I feel like without the representation, it's hard to envision success without examples. Um, especially just in the newsroom, there aren't a lot of Black women staff writers. There aren't a lot of Black women editors. I would say, as a freelance writer, the majority of my pieces are edited by white women or white men for the different various publications that I write for. And then when it comes to just the literary agency, Black women are not getting book deals the same way white people are getting book deals. And often for a Black person to get their first book deal, it has to be a book about race. It has to be, it's like, oh, I have to write this book that the benefit is going to educate non-Black people, that the book is going to educate white people. I can write about skateboarding. I can write about music. There's many things that I can write about. But a lot of times, in order to break into this industry, it has to be almost like traumatic work that you have to put in. During the summer of 2020, what I would have loved to do instead of writing about race and having to watch all of these traumatic, horrifying videos that were happening in my community to people in my community, I would have loved to just take a social media break, to have turned it off, as many people did when they saw that it was messing with their sleep, messing with their stress levels. But for me to really be able to break into this industry, I knew that what white editors wanted from me was this race writing because they did not have the range to cover it. I did. And so, while a lot of great things came from it, I got a book deal, I was able to buy an apartment, all these things. At the same time, I did not get to relax during a time that I feel like, especially Black people, especially Black women, should have been able to relax that summer and been able to turn the news off.
Wow. I'm really curious, if you don't mind me asking, how does it make you feel when you write a piece about race and culture and identity that is so deeply rooted within your own experience, and you have it edited by people who may not understand anything about your experience?
Yeah, I will first say, just in writing it, it's a lot of times it's often very therapeutic, especially if it's something that I pitched and it's something I want to write. A lot of my articles, especially during summer 2020, were articles that stemmed from conversations that I was having with my Black friends, with my Black woman friends, us venting to each other. Oh my God, did you see this video? I can't believe. Did you see how white people reacted to this? And realizing, okay, there's an article here. We need to tell white people that they can't just be activists online. They need to also be activists offline. Everything that we were talking about, I was able to, instead of being in therapy, which I probably should have at the time, I was able to write about it as if I would have just written in a journal and write a think piece or opinion piece. But then when it's edited by a non-Black person, oftentimes there are things that I then have to go back to the editor and explain in their edit or in their feedback and be like, oh, maybe we should remove this, or oh, maybe you should say this. And I have to go back and be like, no, actually, we don't need to say this, or this doesn't need to be removed, or you shouldn't take this part out because. And so it's like the few times that I have the upper hand of the editor because I know what I'm talking about and I have the range and I have the experience to cover this topic. And that's why you're reaching out to me to cover it anyways, because you don't have Black women in your newsroom. So you're reaching out to freelance writers. And it's a huge
Hmm.
issue within the journalism community. I would say majority of my Black friends who are writers, they're not staff writers at the New York Times or these big publications. They're freelance writers. And when we're picked, when we need this article about Juneteenth, we need this article about race, we need someone to talk about this shooting, because they don't even have the people in the newsroom to cover it. So they have to go externally. Where it would just be easier to hire us full time because many of us would like to work at these big publications too.
Well, absolutely. And I think many people are extremely qualified to be working at those publications, regardless of what their skin color is or their religion is, or that's the thing. Like sometimes people say, like, oh, I don't see color, perhaps as a way to make a clear stand against racism and discrimination, or perhaps as a way to pawn off responsibility on this topic to someone else.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yes, I agree, we shouldn't see color, meaning we shouldn't discriminate and we shouldn't differentiate between color, race, religion, gender, sexual preference, identity, etc., because people should receive equal opportunities and equal chances to be heard. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone deserves to have a seat at a specific table, because not everyone is qualified for that specific job or field or realm. But I think that
Hmm.
qualifications should be based on merit and skill and have nothing to do with color or race or gender. But as we know, that's not how the world works. And because that's not how the world works, then I think we should see color and we should celebrate diversity in all ways. And we should appreciate the unique perspective each person can bring to any given situation. But as you say, you should not be limited to that. That's not all that you're
Right.
able to provide. That's not all you bring to the table.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I go back to just in the writing industry, whether it's journalism or the literary world, you see a lot of white people being able to cover and write about whatever it is that is of their interest. If they want to write a book about their dating life, if they want to make a show about this, make a movie about this. Whereas a lot of times, Black people and in general, probably people of color, you will see a lot of our work has to do with race. And I think part of that is we want to put that out there because we want people to know, but also because that's the only opportunity we're given to put work out there is when it's about race. Like I said, there's many things that I can cover and I have many interests. I'm not my interest is not even race. It's a part my race is, my identity is a part of who I am, but I'm not the race girl who wants to go around like and just talk about race all day and educate everyone. I In my normal day-to-day life, I talk about music, I talk about skateboarding, I talk about interior design. There's so much more to me and more to these people, these writers, but we at the end of the day are really only get the green light if it appeals to a wide audience. And so a great example of this is during the summer of 2020, I wrote an article for the New York Times about Juneteenth. And this was a holiday that I've been celebrating all throughout my childhood. My dad started the Juneteenth parade and celebration in Grand Prairie, Texas, where I'm from. And so I have a very close connection to this holiday. And I had been pitching this article about Juneteenth every summer because Juneteenth happens every June 19th, just like Christmas happens every December. And it had never been picked up by different publications. They'd say, oh, we don't really have, an audience for it, or, oh, we're not really covering that. But all of a sudden in summer 2020, when white people were curious about Juneteenth, what is Juneteenth? What is this holiday? Black Lives Matter. We got to talk about Juneteenth. I finally got the opportunity to write about Juneteenth. So
Hmm.
and that is hard to grapple with and deal with, that a lot of times I have great ideas or we have these great ideas, but it has to be greenlit by a white person, by a white editor, by a white audience to say you can now cover it.
To be relevant in that moment. But what many people don't realize is that these things are for some people, these things are relevant every single day of their lives. And just because
Hmm.
someone else doesn't have the same experience as you doesn't mean it's not relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
I think this is always such an interesting topic because going back to what you said about being asked to cover topics that you obviously have a lot of experience and knowledge about, one, because they don't have people like you on their regular staff, like that, first of all, is an issue. And that, first of all, is something that needs to be changed. But then we
Hmm.
get to the part of being asked to cover something because it's your experience, because the people who are hiring or whatever don't have that experience, and so they are in a way outsourcing that. And in a positive light, that shows that they're interested in learning more, that shows that they're interested in getting a more authentic, a more genuine, a more relevant, concrete perspective, perhaps to help educate themselves and their community. How do you feel about that sort of paradox?
Well, I still feel at the end of the day, there needs to be more representation in these places, in newsrooms. News is worldly, news is global. So it doesn't make sense for what appeals to a white audience, what a white editor wants to cover or a white writer wants to cover to be the standard, and then everything else be something additional that we should outsource. That
Absolutely.
already is a sign that is a sign of discrimination. That is a sign of othering. That is letting me know you want my work right now because this is working for you, but you don't think of me as a well-rounded journalist. When you
Mm.
see my work, the goggles are so fogged that anybody who actually goes onto my website can see I'm a well-rounded journalist. I have about 5 different sections where I've covered things very highly. I've done a profile on Tony Hawk for my skateboarding section. Who can I speak to that's larger than Tony Hawk in that world? I've done print pieces for the Rolling Stone where I've interviewed musicians. I interviewed Prince's personal photographer who talked to me about what it was like to photograph Prince for the last like 20 years before his passing. Just there's
Wow.
range there. Yet all these people can see me as is somebody that can write about race. So the goggles are so fogged that these people are not even seeing the breadth, the range of my work. And I think that's also what happens a lot with hiring when it comes to newsrooms, these staff writer jobs. Why are people of color not getting these roles? Is it because they think of, oh, they, can only cover this? In my opinion, the person who cannot cover race, cannot cover culture and identity, and has to often outsource it, but can cover these topics of celebrity and things that I would say almost anybody can cover because it doesn't have to relate so closely to identity, is the person who has the less range, who has the less experience. I think you get more when
Mm,
you hire
yeah.
people and you hire writers with different identities and backgrounds and cultures, because obviously there's more experience there, there's more to write about.
100%. Absolutely. I think this idea of pigeonholing people is a systemic issue. And it's funny because, when I met you, I don't know, it's so funny. Like, I know that you're so multi talented. I mean, you play violin and you were a model and you're a writer and you have written for these publications and you're a teaching fellow at Stanford. Like, for me, you're just like an absolute badass. And it doesn't even
Thanks.
occur to me that someone else won't see you that way. And yeah, perhaps that's because I'm also a woman of color. I don't know. It's interesting, but it's horrible. I think that that's something you have to deal with on a daily basis. This kind of feeling of not being recognized for who you are
Mm-hmm.
as a person as a whole. And that's not something that I can say that I have a lot of experience with, because I am kind of an anomaly in the Western classical music world. There aren't a lot of Indians in the Western classical music world. But being the first, as I mentioned before, like being the first to attend some of these big prestigious music schools and being a prize winner, being the first doesn't mean I'm the only one out there. It just means that I got lucky enough to have a chance to be seen and heard, to have a seat at the table, to be highlighted, to be recognized. But it shouldn't be a rarity.
Right. I think it's FKA Twigs, who one of my favorite music artists, who said, when you are a Black woman, um, in order to be seen, you have to be exceptional in order to be seen as ordinary. And I really started to think about that, and how that is translated into multiple aspects of my life. And I think maybe you can even speak to this as a brown woman too, um, especially just like in dating or in interviewing. When I've interviewed for jobs, I feel like the very first thing I will mention is, oh, I got a book deal at 25 with Penguin Random House. Like
It's
and I'm not
incredible.
saying I'm not, thank you. And I'm not saying this to like toot my own horn, but it's just like, if these certain things that I'm saying are not, it don't make you think that I am the person for this position, that I can, carry out this role. If being on retainer with the Guardian, which is something that is not common, or having written for the New York Times, or having even held these staff roles. I've worked as an editor at Quartz, and I worked as an editor and reporter at BuzzFeed. What more? I almost want to ask people, like, well, then what is the thing that would make you think that I'm qualified, or what would get me the
Right.
job? It's as if, like, there's nothing more that I can say. And it's the same a lot of times. I noticed, like, when I was heavily dating, pre-pandemic, I was dating a lot outside of my race, and I felt like when I was dating, especially white men, I had to be, I don't want to compare myself to their past partners or the other women they were dating, but I know if it came to career, and these were men who were very attracted to women based on, what are you doing in terms of your career, things like that, it just was never enough. It would be like they were interested in me, but when it came down to it, they would end up being in a relationship with a white woman who oftentimes would be figuring things out, who, you know, they would explain, like, oh, I want someone career driven, I want someone blah, blah, blah. And I felt I was that person. And then I would see who they would end up with. And it's not even so much that the person's race, but they would end up with these people who weren't the type of people they were describing when they were talking about where they wanted their partner to be in terms of career, financial situation, things like that. And so that quote really sits with me, where it's like, you have to be exceptional just to be considered ordinary.
I think also people tend to project, and very often someone's behavior towards another, especially when it's negative, has a lot more to do with themselves than the person the behavior is towards. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I think whether it's dating, whether it's career, whether it's jobs, whether it's competitions, whether it's concerts, whether, whatever we're talking about, it's a really hard thing to constantly deal with rejection. And at the end of the day, you start to wonder, is it because of my skills or is it because of my color? Is it because of my resume or is it because of my race? And
Hmm.
those are hard
Hmm.
questions to have to ask yourself when you're already struggling with your own identity, just because all humans struggle with our identities at some point, let alone those of us who actually are, quote unquote, the minority or have faced discrimination or racism or any sort of difficulties that end up resulting in lifelong insecurities or doubts or worries or complexes. And I think we don't talk enough. I said this in the beginning. I think we don't talk enough about how racism and discrimination affects one's mental health and one's view of oneself.
Hmm. Hmm. So I think when it comes to, yeah, mental health and what part discrimination and racism plays on that, one, as I've seen in my personal life and the life of my peers, it causes many of us to overwork ourselves and burn out. Because if you're already feeling like there aren't a lot of people who look like me in my industry, there aren't a lot of people who have had major success stories or examples for me to look to in my industry, then you are going to naturally start overworking yourself because you feel like you have to make up
Yeah.
for the amount of people that have been missing, have not been given the opportunity who look like you in your industry. So you're not just trying to do the job, you're trying to be the best at the job. Simone Biles talks about this a lot too, where she feels like there's, the world is on her back, or like a young Black girl's on her back, because it's like you get to finally, you find this one example um, who looks like you in gymnastics. So for Black gymnasts, they're all looking to Simone. There's a lot of pressure to win, whereas white gymnasts have been winning and have been dominating the industry of gymnastics, professional gymnastics, for years. And so, yes, they still want to win, and there's still a lot of pressure. But I feel like there's this a bigger unspoken pressure when you are the first or one of the few of your race, of your background, of your gender, whatever, to succeed, because you're trying to do it for all of these people.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think you and I can both relate to the incredible joy and pride we felt when Kamala Harris was sworn in as vice president, because she
Exactly.
is half Indian, half Black, and a female. And that represents,
Hmm.
both of us together. And to be able to see that in what has been a completely male driven government and 99.9% white male driven government
Hmm.
was incredible. And that kind of representation, gives so much to all the communities that look up to that person, whether it's Kamala Harris or Simone Biles or someone like you or someone like me. But I feel like it should be celebrated and not then, it's like, as you say, more pressure somehow is put on us. More, it's like we're carrying the weight on our shoulders then, as you say, to represent for all of our kind.
Hmm.
But it shouldn't be like that. It should be, why are we the first, or why are we only the first or the only ones?
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's just an accomplishment already to get there. And so then the extra pressure to win constantly, and and face scrutiny when they don't do well, and it's already just an accomplishment to get there, because getting there when you are an individual in any industry, there's also a lot going on behind the scenes there that you don't have as strong of a sense of community that maybe you would if there were more people like you there. It can be very lonely. I would assume that gymnastics at a lot of times has been very lonely for Simone. Things that she was facing, maybe microaggressions, things that were happening to her that maybe she didn't feel like she could talk to with her teammates at the time or the people she was surrounded by, simply because she was one of the only or few Black women, on her team or within her industry or in her group. in her cohort. And I think people have to recognize that too. I think
Yeah.
also in terms of like it causing us to overwork, then when you're overworking, then you burn out. And I read an article about this for The Cut about how Black women are extremely susceptible to burnout because when they get an opportunity, we're like the least employed group and one of the lowest paid demographics in the US. So when you get an opportunity, it is this like, okay, I have got to continuously work hard and overwork to prove why I even deserve this position to begin with, to keep this position, to not get laid off, to not be let go. It's not enough just to do my job. I need to overperform. So because
Right.
already they weren't giving positions to people like me to begin with. And it all can lead to burnout. I think it can cause self-doubt. I used to really doubt myself as a writer because I wasn't getting these jobs, any staff writer role I would apply to. And then I finally, I was seeing a therapist at the time, a Black woman therapist, and she was like, "You're qualified for these roles, so there's something going on with that organization or that person, that hiring team, about why you're not getting the role. Your work shows that you're a good writer." And that's when I was like, "Yeah, I'm done applying for these roles. I'm just going to be freelance," because being told no so many times and getting these, rejection letters when I apply for these positions is making me feel like I'm not qualified, but I know I'm qualified. And then to go see the person who they do hire, later on LinkedIn, go see if the position was filled and to see that they are way less qualified than you and had, less clips, less writing examples, the difference in their stories versus your stories, the type of work they were covering, and to see they still got the role. A lot of times it has let me know that it is about race, whether it is conscious or unconscious that of the hiring team, but that it is not about me.
Right. It must be so frustrating to deal with that and to not, as I said before, like we already have to face all of the insecurities and the doubts and the anxieties and the fears that creep up when we receive rejection, which is a part of normal life. But then to have on top of that the question of, well, is it because of the color of my skin or where I come from, I think is so damaging. And that's why I said earlier, like, I don't think we should be seeing color in the sense that we should only be taking people for jobs based on merit and skill.
Hmm.
Oh, and okay, of course, I'm speaking in very black and white terms right now, no pun intended. But I don't mean, like, obviously there's factors of, is someone actually personable? Are they able to actually communicate well? Are they actually able to engage well? It's not just about where they've gone to school or what do they know, but there's so many factors around that can make one stand out above another. And we see this in Ivy League schools when kids are applying for Ivy League schools, and you've got 100 kids with 4.0 or 4.2 GPAs, and they've done this and this and this and this and this and this. What actually makes someone stand out? Well, I think that for people like you and I, we don't actually appreciate standing out simply for the color of our skin.
Right. I would agree with that. I want to stand out for my work, for what I do, for what I bring, for what I offer, and let the color of my skin be just an example that Black women can and have always been able to do these things. We just haven't been given the opportunity to do them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today and having this conversation. I mean, this we could talk about we could talk about this for hours. And I'm so happy to have you here on this podcast because, again, representation matters. And to have
Thank you.
a fellow artist, person of color, someone who has experienced some similarities in their own upbringing and their own difficulties and frustrations with their job. I think it's really important that we have these conversations and we talk about it and we share and we just help to further this conversation along as best we can.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @Conscious Artist Podcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.